Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today for this quick chat. The buzz ahead of this weekend's Indy 500 is big, but perhaps one of the biggest talking points is not what we are going to see, but rather who we are not going to see in Sunday's race. What was your reaction to Fernando Alonso not making the cut for this year's Indy 500 grid?
I mean, obviously, I think it's absolutely abysmal that he won't be on the grid. But I think there's a strong talking point from the point of view that Kyle Kaiser, and Junkos, who was, struggling for money because they lost 2 sponsors just before the start of the practice week. They were massively struggling, and then Kyle goes and has a huge shunt, one of like 5 last week, and he still makes the grid and knocks out one of the world's most famous drivers. So there's a positive spin from that point of view. But when you look at the comparative budgets of the 2 projects, it's just laughable that in a bitter way that Fernando isn't with us, because there was absolutely nothing that Fernando didn't do to make it happen. It was everything that was around him that was kind of like rather dysfunctional, let's say.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I find hard to understand is why didn't McLaren join up again with Andretti in light of their successful run together 2 years ago? And how much did that decision have to do with Honda, if at all?
It had a whole lot to do with Honda. Honda Japan didn't like the fact that Fernando spent a couple of years kind of like suggesting that their engine unit was an F2 engine unit rather than an F1. So that hurt. And also McLaren, in their desperation to back Fernando and keep him on side, from everything I read on Motorsport.com, he was, they were started kind of like following what Fernando was saying and started throwing Honda under the bus. Now, I say that it may well have been justified, but those things go down very badly in Japan. So, yes, it had to be a Chevy. It had to be a Chevy engine that they worked with this time, and of course the Chevy engine is powerful. It kind of dominated qualifying, so there was nothing wrong with that. That wasn't, like Alonso, that can't be blamed for what happened. Pratt and Miller, who operate the Chevy project, have been fantastic. Every team says that they're great at sharing their data. What Penske gets is the same as what the one-off teams at the Indy 500 get. So there's nothing wrong with what they did. But the other problem is that when Fernando was last here in 2017, it was very much perceived as McLaren were backing a 6th Andretti Autosport car, and this time they wanted to go it alone, or more alone, and not be seen as just kind of like parasites on the back of another team. And so they then had to look for teams. Now there's only a certain number of teams that will agree to that kind of thing. Like, for example, Scuderia Corsa back one of Ed Carpenter Racing's teams. Ed Carpenter Racing is a fantastic organisation when it comes to creating a great car for going around Indianapolis Motor Speedway at 230 miles an hour. Now, what's in it for Ed Carpenter to kind of like hand over the keys to the kingdom, as it were, and then not get credit for it because this is perceived to be a McLaren project? There's no benefit to that whatsoever.
At what point during the week did you think, okay, he might seriously not be able to qualify for the Indy 500 this year?
Well, my hopes went high from when... No, okay. I did think eventually he'd make it, but I knew it would be kind of like, it would just require all the stars to align. I guess the idea that Fernando could be qualified by people with a fraction of his talent is something that makes people think, well, obviously around Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it's all about the car, but it's also about the driver working with the team, but it has to be a team with substantial knowledge of the speedway. So going back to your point, they had an electrical issue when they first tested the car out in Texas Motor Speedway, and then they had another electrical issue here at Indianapolis Motor Speedway on April the 24th. And these are kind of like bugs that really should or could or would have been ironed out by a team that is constantly running. But unfortunately, the Indy team was comprised of, good names, Gilles de Ferrer and Bob Fernley, Zach himself. But they hadn't all worked as a unit. And, Zach did explain that that's one of the reasons that they took a while to rebuild the car after Fernando's crash. But when he didn't appear on track the next day, that is when I thought, as one veteran team manager said, he didn't want to be named. He said, "What the hell were they doing in there?" Because, and it turns out that they didn't want the car to run because it was the wrong type of orange. It wasn't the correct papaya orange. Now, you can believe that if you like. I mean, that's certainly what Zach said, but I hope that that's not true. But the idea that this was, again, it was a tail wagging the dog. It was a marketing exercise and not there wasn't a sense of panic until they panicked too late, at which point several teams told them to, go take a hike. They weren't going to help them get in the field. And, some would say quite right too. Michael Andretti kind of relented and gave them some setup sheets, but it should never have gotten that far. The fact is, Felix Rosenqvist crashed his car 4.5 hours after Fernando crashed his, and yet the next morning, that Chip Ganassi racing car was going through tech at 10 and was ready to hit the track when the track opened at 11. Fernando's car was not, and just stayed in the garage all day. And at that point, I was thinking, when are these people going to get a sense of urgency?
Yeah, and as you said, the car had electrical issues on day one. Obviously, Alonso's crash during practice on day two didn't contribute much either. But, we know he's a fast driver, no doubt there. He qualified in the top 10 2 years ago. So where did the team go wrong? Was their setup just fundamentally off from day one? Or do you think they were overambitious from the start in wanting to do everything themselves without the help of a more experienced team?
I think you nailed it on the second point there. They needed more people with speedway experience. The fact is, it is tough for a team doing a one-off, but recognizing that it isn't just a one-off, but it's also a one-off by a bunch of people who aren't used to running at the speedway. That's a double whammy right there. So, what were the alternatives? Maybe come and do a road course race just to learn how to do pit stops, because they're so different from Formula One pit stops because you need to refuel and there's fewer people allowed over the wall. So there's that aspect of it. But I think also they need to look at, there's a fantastic team here run by Dennis Reinbold called Dry and Reinbold, and they do a fabulous job each year just coming to the Indy 500 and operating, as a Chevy team and able to compete, pretty reasonably with the full-time teams. But that's because he's been doing it for donkey's years, and he was previously a full-time team owner. And, now that the field, this is the closest field in Indianapolis 500 history, from front to back, every little bit of experience and knowledge and engineering expertise is going to make a difference. I think someone worked out that after 4 laps of the track, which is a qualifying run, the difference between the pole sitter, Simon Pagenaud, and the slowest car, Pippa Mann, that difference is just 60 feet. I mean, that's how fine the margins are. If you get anything out of line at that point, you're going to pay the price. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened.
And Where does McLaren's IndyCar program now stand? Will it be cancelled to focus all their resources exclusively on F1, or do you think they'll come and try again next year with perhaps some more outside help?
I'd like to think that they have learned from this experience. I mean, Zach, in the parts of the interview where he was accepting some blame himself, seemed to suggest that yes, they have learned from this experience. Certainly Gilles de Ferran, the sporting director, who was all apologies on Sunday night, he too suggested that yes, they've learned from this and they will get some more people involved that actually have experience at the speedway. They want to do it full time. I have zero idea, but I know the enthusiast in me desperately wants them here, because McLaren is greater than this. They won 3 Indy 500s in their past. And there's no way McLaren should be walking away from this with their tail between their legs forever. They should accept the punishment of the speedway, as it were, and come back, because it's the kind of prestigious race where a prestigious brand like McLaren absolutely belong. But they need to desperately not to F it up next time round.
And how do you think this whole debacle, if you will, how will this impact, if at all, Alonso's desire to come back next year or another year for a third attempt at the Indy 500?
Now, I would say it's stoked the fires even more. He will be desperate to come back, because this isn't the way he wants to walk away. And I love the fact that he said, bearing in mind he didn't take part in it last year, he at the press conference on Sunday night, he said, I would rather be here and 34th than to have been like last year, where I stayed at home. So I mean, he's really got it in his veins here, without question at all, and he will be back. So, but I believe his contract with McLaren terminates at the end of this year. God knows what the conditions will be for a return, but I think he will need to look very carefully at when the next, if there is a next IndyCar project starting, when that starts with McLaren. If he doesn't believe it's soon enough or good enough, I'm sure he'll have it written into his contract that he can come elsewhere and find a ride. I mean, people would be tripping over themselves to have Fernando Alonso in the team. I mean, it'd just be a wonderful addition. And I'm sure, the Spanish fan, will have a huge hit in Europe as well, having him here again. And it's something IndyCar would desperately want to make happen. And Fernando knows that he's always welcome here, and that not a single, apart from his son, not a single shred of blame for the fact that he's not in this race has been laid at his doorstep. Everyone has a crash at Indy at some point. It's just the nature of the beast. The fact that he had one this time, that shouldn't have prevented him from being on the grid at the end of the day. So yeah, I think he'll keep coming back for as long as his eyesight and reaction times are still intact. And I think the other interesting thing is that he loves it so much that even if he were to win it, I think he'd come back the next year to defend it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who bought tickets for the race hoping to watch him this weekend that will be very disappointed, but no doubt I'm sure we'll see him back again. Well, David, thank you so much for your insight. We really, really appreciate it. So I'll see you this weekend, and thank you for joining us on Motorsport Report. We really appreciate it.
I wish I had happier news to report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.